Hello and welcome to our video series on Tech for Good. In this series we'll be chatting to values-led business owners and discuss what Tech for Good means to them. Enjoy! Hey, we are back for another Tech for Good video. Today we have Anna Freeman from Zavfit and we're going to talk about Tech for Good, Zavfit and what it means, all about it. So, Anna, do you maybe want to give a slightly better introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I introduced myself and Zavfit kind of as a bit of a story. There is two sides to me and my background, which really led to where we are today with Zavfit. So I'll fill you in on that, Josh. From a career perspective, I have always worked in finance and tech. At a very early age, I worked out that the corporate life really wasn't going to be for me. I've always been incredibly driven to make a difference and really change the world. Sounds cliche, but it's true. At age 19, when I was sponsored by Ford Motor Company and worked out I was going to take 16 people to get a decision done, I thought, well, that's not really what I'd hoped for. So I knew some friends that had a startup business, knew nothing about what they were doing. They were in finance and they had created a piece of technology which automated stocks and shares trading. And the first customer that we sold to was the London Stock Exchange. And I joined them as employee number 6. Wow. So that gave me my first taste for startups, and effectively enjoyed every minute of it being like working as a family. So I very quickly moved from a tech role into a commercial role, which is where I focus my energies largely. So I've always been interested in tech and anything that's going to improve lives, anything that's going to change the status quo. I'm always one to ask, why do we accept the status quo? Let's ask the right questions. And that's what working in tech enabled me to do. So that was my first kind of introduction to it, and realizing that we could just push things forward. Absolutely loved startup world and have worked in startups in the finance and tech space ever since. I was obviously quite different because back in the early 2000s I was one of very few women in tech and in finance, and I was very young. So I would say I always thought quite differently, and I would go along to, because I was client facing, I would go along to many conferences and mingle with lots of people within both the banking and the investment space, and feel a little bit frustrated that a lot of the innovation that happened was driven by regulation as opposed to driven by customer need. And the other thing I always felt was I was quite passionate about what I did, and I would sit at a dinner table and nobody would be that interested in what I was doing. It wasn't dinner table talk. And so as the years went on, I felt, I'd sit and just look at what was going on and grew in confidence in my own self. I'd start to think the stuff that really needs to change here. We're very insular as an industry. A new business started up called Nutmeg, which really at the time excited me. It was the first time that they were talking the right story about caring about the customer and realizing what the major problem was and the need was, which was, we don't have any engagement with money. There's most people, it's hugely a taboo subject, especially in our Western world. It's strangely associated with success and with
stature and so on.
Status. So hence people try to give a perception rather than actually perhaps feel that they can talk about the reality and just create an image. And I'm sure there's other things that play into that, but certainly money plays a role in that. So I started to feel excited that that problem had been identified and wanted to become involved in that movement, if you like. At probably approximately the same time, the Competition and Markets Authority came in and said there's not enough competition in banking. You know, in the UK, there's 6 major banks, and they wanted that to change because of the lack of engagement and because of the problems, which I'll go on to talk about more, which is where we've focused on with ZavFit. What we later discovered, I didn't know this at the time, but since then I've become very passionate about health and well-being. That's the other part to me. I grew up in the sports hall. I competed internationally at sport at a very young age, which has always given me I guess an outlet. That's been the other side to me when I'm not working. I love to keep fit. I love and enjoy sport. So that's kind of I guess taught me a lot when I was growing up about how to approach different things in life as well. And in 2010, I went through my own difficult time and had to really focus on my own health and well-being. I had had a successful career, and I remembered being happy, but I had to sit down and actually write down the things that I thought would make me feel happy.
Yeah.
So this was all going on at the same time with the banking industry needing to change and to engage people in a different way. And so when I started to reflect and think, okay, I need to do something different in my career, I need to do things for myself that make me feel good. For me, I knew what the things, when I sat down and thought about it, I was quite fortunate. I knew for me, sport, fitness, and winning.
And I was going to say financial services.
Financial services did not feature in that, actually. But I made myself some stretch goals. I'd always promised myself I would master a new sport. So I went out and did that. I started boxing in my 30s. And what else did I do? Singing. I've always sung. So I found a new coach and decided to change, master a new, different type of singing. It was a completely subconscious process at the time. I wasn't really thinking about this as some logical process. But very, very quickly, I had noticed massive changes in my health and well-being. And then I can genuinely picture back walking down the street thinking, I've stopped worrying about spending on anything else because I'm so almost fulfilled doing what I'm doing with these things that I've pinpointed as the things that make me feel happy. So then flip back to when I was thinking, where am I going next with my career and everything that was going on to want me to help me, I guess, get customers more engaged with finance. I started to think about the problem very differently. I think it's no different, actually. It's a behavior in the same way as the way I think about health and fitness. When people always want to do the right thing with their fitness, with their diet, but inherently we don't. None of us do. And why is that? So I then discovered there's been lots of data around it, but worrying about money is actually the leading cause of mental health problems. So we all, probably I started really thinking about this back in 2017. I'd started thinking about the problem as a whole in around 2015 when they were starting to say we need to, these changes need to come about. Well, there was a new regulation went into play at the beginning of 2018, the open banking, which you'll be well aware of, the Payment Services Directive, which is a European regulation. So that opened up huge opportunities. The data, you all know what this is, Josh, but for anyone listening, that just means that any spending that you and I do, any of that data was previously owned by our bank, but now that data belongs to us and we can do what we like with it. We can give permission to someone to access it should we want to, and they've created a regulation to set for companies like ZavFit to leverage that data and enable me to help you with money. So that's kind of a little bit of the background to how we arrived here. There's a lot more to that. I think there's just one final thing to say, Josh. I realize I'm talking a lot, about this specific answer.
That's all right. I'm learning loads here.
Well, the final part to the story was probably didn't really take place till 2019 in the back end, when a lot of the financial companies realized they needed to engage in a different way, and they've started using the phrase financial well-being. Mm-hmm. But sadly, it was just a language change and a branding exercise at that stage. Flip forward to January 2020, suddenly things change massively overnight. We all know there's huge awareness now of the fact that we all have mental health and we can proactively do something about it. So I think there is a genuine increase in understanding from the industry that we do have a health issue. But in the past, it's not been dealt with. Money has never been seen as a health issue. Health and well-being, if you look at it in its definition and its entirety, well-being is actually made up of, we have 8 pillars at ZavFit, but there's different pillars that are very all closely integrated. If we've done some research which tells us, if you ask people, what do you think well-being means, and they will say largely physical and a little bit mental, they're starting to understand that. But there's a whole suite of other things. There's environmental, there's the social side. We've all discovered that this year, the issues of loneliness that people feel when they're isolated. A whole host of others. There's a diagram that I could perhaps share with you afterwards that you could show that to your listeners. But finance is tightly integrated into all of those, because if, again, when we interviewed people, they said, well, of course, money is my greatest source of stress, but I never think of it as part of my well-being. So
it's assumed.
It's just, this financial well-being phrase is used, but it's generally focused on the well-being of my finances, not the well-being of me as an outcome. Mm-hmm. So I wanted ZavFit to really use as a commodity this data that we've now got from a financial regulatory perspective, and combine it together with psychology data, and to understand you better. And as I described on my own journey, to try and help you get to know yourself better and the things that genuinely make you feel happy. And if you can understand that, then that should then help you when you're making decisions around how to spend your time, spend your money. And that gives you the backdrop, really, Josh, to how we've arrived at where we've arrived at with ZavFit. So we wanted to be the first health solution for money, where the outcome of using our tool is improving your health and well-being by helping you with spending habits.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that, as you were saying before, with financial services, change is being affected by policy and regulation. And here we have a transformation that policy needed to change in order to enable us to affect the change to the products and services that people had.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they've flipped it on their head with that one. Do you think that you had all the advent of the challenger banks, and you said that there needed to be more banking competition? Do you think these challenger banks thought more about the holistic view of individuals' finances and how they interact with them also started to lead to this change, or do you think that they were just kind of going on the kind of just purely on a tech mobile, we're going feature led, rather than the kind of science behind it?
I think Anne Boden with Starling and Tom with Monzo, I think it's been driven largely by saying there's a whole suite of people out here that are not engaged with their money. They know what the problem is. They know that people are needing to, that something is wrong in the system and that need fixing. Mm-hmm. I don't think necessarily, perhaps because it's not their passion, or necessarily that they would have, when they were starting their new banks, would have been thinking at all about the well-being aspect or the mental health aspect. I'm sure that they'll be thinking of ways they can integrate that now. Yeah. However, I don't think that that's what that was set up to do. It was to make it more accessible from a tech perspective to a younger generation. That would have been what was driving, and make it from a back end system just much easier, much cheaper. Because Anne herself came from HSBC, so she would have known the legacy issues with the banking
Yeah,
system.
it's archaic, isn't it? Because these are organizations that have been around for hundreds of years, and they're slow to adopt change. Do you think that? No. And I think that the issue that they had from a tech perspective is that their systems are so dated they can't change overnight, and they can't adapt to these new features and requirements that people have these days. Do you think that with Nutmeg, their premise was they want to make investing accessible and safe for the everyday user? I've got a Nutmeg account that I use from time to time, and it's interesting because before you have complex trading platforms and you buy your stocks and shares, you don't really know what you're doing unless you're kind of educated and in the financial sector. And so your average person off the street just didn't. They put the money in a low yield ISA and left it, and weren't able to benefit from what was accessible to them.
I still think that's a problem, and I said that to Nick when he started. I still think that traditional financial products are not that interesting to people. They don't know, and they don't know, the average, unless, as you said quite correctly, unless they're in the finance space, they might not know what an ISA even is. And there are certain people that are interested in it, but largely that may be a little bit closer to it, working within industry. But those that aren't, that a mortgage, a pension, an investment, it's very overwhelming for many people when they've got an affordability issue, and that's the main thing that they're focused on. It's we only live once. We might not get to the point where we even need a pension. Only 14% of people, the last statistic I heard, have a pension. There's a real engagement problem with the actual products themselves that have been fit for, perhaps, they've been created. And my very cynical view is thinking about it differently, as we do at ZavFit from a health perspective. I believe in pensions, I believe in investments, and I know how they can help.
Yeah.
However, I do think there needs to be a balance. It's all been focused on save. Saving is focused on the future only. And the future is where a lot of our anxieties come from, is worrying about and thinking about the future. But we actually, in order to care for our health and our well-being, we have to be present and we have to think about today. So there needs to be a balance there. But a lot of the financial business models are set up to manage assets under management is what the business models are created on. So they can't, they know they can't. I've spoken to some, but they know they can't change that. So therefore, everything that they do has to be driven towards selling those products.
Yeah.
And building up assets, making money off of your money. So they're not going to encourage you to spend it necessarily. Yeah. That's my cynical view. It's controversial, but I think this is the medium to be controversial.
Yeah, I think before I go too far off topic, one of the things was you've got Nutmeg, which is like managed accessible investments where you set your risk level, you pay in a certain amount a month, and you can track the progress. So it's fairly straightforward and accessible. Then you have platforms like Robinhood, which controversially last year, the year before, they were giving people easy access to stocks and shares, and people were bankrupting themselves and massively over leveraging because it was almost unregulated what people could do, and it was based in the States, and I think there was a few laws or things that were slightly different to the UK, but there was lots of trading in futures and quite complicated trades that were made easy. But if you don't understand what you're doing, then if you're trying to short stocks and so on, which a lot of it goes over my head, you can get yourself in a bit of bother, which probably led to a lot of anxiety and stresses and strains on your well-being. So it's like the tech can enable you to access it, but can also be a massive hindrance.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's huge, obviously they have to put lots of warnings and stuff around any investment, because any investment is at risk. So just the daily, I just figured it's a missing, that's all done well in the industry. there's a missing part to play here, which is let's help people, let's give people a guide to spending.
Yeah.
As well. For me, that was missing.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the background and how you arrived at ZavFit. Would you describe ZavFit as a tech for good business, and what does tech for good mean to you, if anything?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I gave it a little bit of thought before we spoke, Josh, because it's not something I've really focused a lot of my, I guess, conversations like this on.
Yeah.
So it's really good to have a focused conversation to make me think about it as much as anything.
Yeah.
I know for your organization, it's been something you've been a shining example of that being one of your core values that you want to, you know, as a business to take forward. Tech for good for me, my whole business, the values of everything that we do is set up around improving health. As I said to you before, that's an area that's a passion to me. Building a business for purpose, I've always found that if you can excel at something, then you will, you know, if you're passionate about something, then the rest will follow and you will excel about it. So when I'm building my team, I'm looking for people around me who are equally passionate about doing something good that is going to change the world. That for me was my premise to starting ZavFit. Is my absolute objective is wanting to do something that will help change, that will help make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah,
that's what tech for good means for me. I have the opportunity through scaling a business, which you can't do unless you have a tech business. So the ability to really get things out to a lot of people is the tech part for me. The good part for me is what we're doing must make a difference to the people that use it, and it must not be, you know, as a business, you do need to be a commercial business in order to make a difference, because you can't grow and exist and thrive unless you're doing that. That's where when I first started ZavFit and started pitching it, I would get often investors saying to me, "Are you a charity, or are you going to be a commercial business?" It was a difficult thing to get my head around at first, why they were asking me that, because I was so passionate about what we were looking to do. But obviously they were coming at it from right, just show me how to make money, which you have to do in order to be able to make a difference. So there's a clear, I guess, in some people's eyes, there's a clear muddling up going on there. You do have to do that, but it doesn't mean that everything that you do around the business can't be focused on making a difference, including your values that you have, how you want to treat the customers that come into contact with you, whether, you know, you do everything that you say you're going to do from a morality perspective, that you're treating your customers absolutely fairly. It plays into every decision that we have as a business to act in a certain way and uphold certain values which are dear to each of us, and everyone that's on the ZavFit team. And we're still in a fairly early stage, but everyone is equally passionate about that. And I'm sure it's the same for your business, that they just wouldn't quite fit if they didn't.
Yeah, it's something that I struggled with for a while, because I almost felt like it was a marketing buzzword, and it wasn't an embodiment of I think I was chatting, was it to Gav or Jeremy previously, that it's actually, for me personally, it's a collection of values rather than a single one. I think you articulated it there with the embodiment of your decision making, and everything has to contribute towards the well-being of your customer, and that can be profitable, and it needs to be profitable in order for it to scale, in order to reach more people. So no, I definitely I agree, but it's
I think we all have to live the values ourselves as well, and constantly, you know, we're all different. What well-being means to me might be different to what it means to you, might be different to what it means to someone else. So I'd never stipulate you must be doing this. For example, I used to in my youth, in my 20s and 30s, but I had a terrible problem with my stomach, and I can no longer, I've got allergies coming out of, you know, everywhere. I can no longer drink. And that's something that I've really actually enjoyed from a change of life perspective. And I know it's it's a huge cultural thing in the UK.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would never turn around to someone and for themselves to say, I think this is a core part of well-being, that you have to live the same way, values that I choose to live by, because I know that it's not that black and white for it to be right for everyone, because there are, you know, there's also benefits of relaxation and stuff like that. But for me, there are certain things I hold dear that I know other people would not. But because I know I have my own toolkit of what health and well-being means to me. And I would encourage everybody themselves to do that for themselves. And it's very individual. I do think even within a partnership, there is something that's right for you that might not be right for your partner. And we can't presume what's right for us is right for the next person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that if you go back to when you were thinking about what made you happy, what makes you happy is very different to what could be very different to what makes me happy. And I think that you're right with ZavFit and identifying what makes you happy and how to do more of that and enable yourself to do more of that is all about that, creating that individuality and also appreciation that everyone's journey is different. But that doesn't mean to say the way that we get there is any different. We all have to go through the same processes. Yeah.
I think finding confidence in that individualism as well, because we're all driven, spending is driven by cultural norms currently. We all do the same things because other people do them, because there is no current guide to it. But actually, if I can get people to understand it's okay for you to spend on, let's say, I don't know, tell me, Josh, a passion of yours.
Well, I've taken up golf recently, which has massively dented my bank account. But I can't wait to buy more golf clubs.
So that's a really good example, because you're not the first one that said something followed up by, you know, a slight little bit of guilt around the finances. In the ZavFit world, if something like golf, what golf does for you is probably takes your head, enables you as a business owner. This is fundamentally important, that we find something that enables our heads to switch off. And in the current climate, I'm finding that so challenging.
Yeah.
But something like golf would absolutely require every single bit of your brain attention for an hour, 4 hours of the day.
You know, it's so funny you say that, because I was chatting to a friend of mine the other day, and I was talking, it was actually, we were chatting about grief, and a way to take a break from grief was to occupy yourself both physically and mentally. And so my thing was going off and playing PlayStation, because I can't concentrate on anything apart from what I'm doing, because it requires both mental and physical stimulation. And the same with golf. And my friend was saying, it's funny that you say that. I was building a wardrobe the other day, and I couldn't think about anything else except for build this wardrobe, because it was both mentally and physically taxing, and it gave them respite from having a crappy day. And it's so vital that you're able to have that that thing that takes you away from your day to day and gives you a bit of a reset.
And it gives you purpose, and it gives you something to. It's the taking your head away and giving you that thing that really lights you up. And it's allowing your brain to have a rest from whatever it is, whether it's grief, pain, just overwork your brain from completely
monotony.
Your brain for just needing a break. But it can also be something that actually brings you huge joy and happiness as well. And you, in my view, you know, when I was making those decisions back when I was going through my own journey, financial, I guess, the financial aspect was not at the top of the list. It wasn't something I couldn't afford, but you wouldn't have gone to a financial advisor and they'd have said, clap, 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 well done you, that's an amazing idea. Because I was spending a lot of money on developing myself and trying to make sure that I was able to get through a very tough time. But in doing so, I found purpose, and I stopped needing to spend on other things. And it completely improved so my argument would be that the golf, it might not be what you typically would have thought I should be spending my money on. I should be putting it away, but putting it away isn't going to improve your health and well-being in the moment. And that's not to say that putting it away, I want to caveat, I'm not against investments, but I am for taking away
living.
that taking away guilt and anxiety over spending on things that are going to improve your health.
Yeah, it's a fairly seismic shift in approaches to money, because it was like growing up you were taught to well, I was taught to kind of, create your monthly budget, set aside your amount for saving, you set your saving goals, and and this is what you do. And really it's not so set in stone. It fluctuates, it changes, it evolves, as you evolve, and your needs and requirements evolve.
It's more than that. From a cultural perspective, we're given a piggy bank when we're born. I don't know if you're a bit younger than me.
No,
but
I got my first bank account, and I got a piggy bank at Bank of Scotland.
There you go. And when I was growing up, we had Mary Poppins, and Mr. Banks took that one coin from the children had found and put it in the bank.
Yeah.
It's just been indoctrinated. And I hate to use that type of phraseology, but we do need to think differently sometimes and push against the status quo and ask the right questions. The number one fact is that worrying about money, and it seems to be agnostic to the amount of money someone has.
It's all relative, isn't it?
It doesn't matter how much money people have. It is the leading source of worry. It keeps people up at night. It causes mental health problems. So we need to focus on how can we help remove that anxiety and that guilt. And so we have to shift thinking. It's going to take a lot of work, but that's what we did. That's why we wanted to start the Money Fitness movement, because we know people are aware now that health and well-being is important. They are engaged with their health and their fitness more than they ever have been before. That industry is growing exponentially. And over the events that we've seen in the last year, there is, it's probably leapt forward another 5 to 10 years in the space of a year in terms of awareness.
Yeah.
For people. So people are open to ideas. How can I understand myself better? How can I do things, how can I do things well? And there's a lot of, people feel guilty, but actually society has just, society is set up in a way that hasn't necessarily encouraged us to do the right things. So we shouldn't blame ourselves. We just need to start thinking, oh, okay, there could be another way of doing things, and I need to not feel guilty. I need to focus on the health aspect of money. That's key, because it's becoming such a problem.
Do you think that, with coronavirus and us as a people all facing, lots of different issues, both financial and external, do you think that, and as you say, it's accelerated a change within how we think about it? Do you think that well-being overall is going to continue to take a much bigger place in people's lives? We look at working from home and the effects that have on people, both positive and negative, and how that's affecting business. And like from a permanent point of view, do you think there'll be a permanent shift in the way that we value our health mentally?
I think there will. I do, because there is now an awareness. I think a lot of people, I've spoken to a lot of businesses through what we're doing with ZavFit, and they have had to step up and change overnight in order to, a lot of businesses have realized they are people businesses, even down to manufacturing, where they have, we've been in touch with a lot of insurance companies who've been dealing with the kind of aftermath, and they're hearing from even those companies, we realize how much we rely on our people and how we need our people to perform. And obviously that right now is one of the biggest challenges, is helping people to carry on being able to perform. And our health and well-being is the key to that, is enabling people to remain productive with keeping absenteeism down and presenteeism, stopping people from when they're actually there, being able to enabling them to focus. And you can only do that, I believe, if each person turns up to work their happiest self. So we've got to help them become that and facilitate them. And I know that you at Geared Up, this is something that you do so well, but facilitating each individual in your business to understand how to be healthy and happy. I try to understand. It's very much easier when you've got a smaller team, as we both do. But for me, I try and understand each individual and what's important to them, And if they don't necessarily see it, I try and help them to find that. And then I will make it my focus to talk to them about those things, for example, the things I know that are really important, and then give them space to be able to do those things if it's not indeed just through their work, which actually is, one on my team. I know that work is a huge part of that, and more so than some of the other team, where I know the passions that they have, and if that is thriving in their life, then they'll turn up to work as their best self, and will get the best out of them, and will love it.
Yeah. So we've talked about the shift in kind of thinking towards mental health and well-being, but from a wider point of view with Tech for Good, do you think there's been a shift in the last few years, or recently, in how businesses are operating and how they approach people, technology, and the effect that they have on the planet and
I
society,
think so, but I do think so. I think that's being driven though by customer demand, and by more of a drive really from it's demand driven, isn't it? So I think there's more, some of the younger generations now care about different things than say my generation or the generation above me did.
Yeah.
That is therefore meaning businesses models are having to change with that, because they've realized that the capitalism driven society hasn't necessarily fulfilled our generation. They want to change it. They want to do things differently. And I do think that's largely why we've got lots of B Corps coming out. People, brands that are doing things for the right reasons are getting more engagement. So therefore you've also got people like you and I in position now, leading companies, who want to change things as well, and want to do things differently, because we've been perhaps hurt by the system. Having experienced burnout myself, health. I remember walking through the City of London thinking, this is just crazy. Why things should be so different to this? There is no single one physical location in this city where people can relax and let off steam that doesn't involve alcohol, other than the gym, which is not for everyone. It's not a place you can go and socialize necessarily. There needs to be something else. This is what I remember thinking when I experienced burnout. It's just it makes things worse. So you're now seeing that come into play, but there's still huge amounts. It's only just the start of it. It's huge amounts to be done to change the way that we are promoting. And you can probably tell from the conversation, to me, the thing that I'm most passionate about is health and well-being. But there's so many other aspects to Tech for Good, and I'm sure you'll interview people that are hugely caring about sustainability and all of those. I'm not saying I'm not, but my personal passion is the health of an individual, because I'm a people person through and through.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I'm discovering through having these conversations, is that, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, is Tech for Good isn't one thing. And that's why I asked what your interpretation of it is, or what it means to you, because I don't think it is one size fits all, because there's lots of different areas that you can have a positive effect on, like you say, both environmentally, personally. There's lots of different things you can achieve with it, and it's just a case of using technology as a vehicle to achieve that change. So on that, just finally, is there anything do you think we could do to create more impact, or encourage more businesses to adopt this line of thinking?
You as Geared Up, or we as a society?
We as a society, I guess,
should be doing to create more impact.
Yeah, or is there anything you think we could do?
It's a good question.
It's quite broad.
I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of noise. This is the problem. There's so much noise and so much information. We all have to, I've heard from my industry particularly, don't think that just because everyone else is saying it, that you shouldn't say it, because so many people don't have the knowledge. There's a lot of people that, the knowledge that you will have about how to improve society. Not everybody has. So that's number one thing. We should not be ashamed to stand up and say it, and not think just because they've said it, I shouldn't. Because the more of us that do, it's a collective effect. So we have a responsibility, I think, which maybe some people are too shy and afraid to stand up and say. I think we have a responsibility to make our mark and make our
more demand.
But what else could people? I do think the whole school system could integrate. Could change. It's quite archaic. There's a wonderful man that died recently, Ken Robertson, who believed that the education system was actually toxic. And he said, he wrote a book called The Element, and in it he wrote lots of stories, but the opening story of the book was of a young girl whose teachers had told her parents she's just, back in the day, she would have been branded a very naughty girl. She couldn't sit still in class and couldn't concentrate. Her parents refused to believe that she was just a naughty girl. And they went and saw a professor, and the professor sat her on the couch and said, right, we're all going to leave the room, let her sit there. And he stuck the radio on. And he said, just watch what she does. And the second that they walked out the room, she started dancing around the room. And they said, she just wants to dance. She just wants to move. The school system, his argument was, it educates us from the waist upwards. There is creativity in all of us. And I don't think we've been encouraged enough through the system to explore what our cleverness is. He says, you go into a room and you say, who in here is clever? And a third of the room will put their hand up. And he said, the right question to answer is, what is your cleverness?
Yeah.
And I think if we can help each individual to discover that for themselves, then we can each affect change in our own way by being an individual, and then that goes against caring for each other, because of course that's very important, but we do need to understand ourselves and how we can contribute to society. That's going off. It's going off on another subject I'm passionate about, but when you're putting me on the spot with a massive question like that,
well, it's a very thoughtful answer.
I'll tell you one idea that I have, and that is, let's think about, and I do think there's massive changes since we were at school. My stepdaughter comes home and talks about growth mindset. I only learned about that in my 30s, and that's amazing. But they can also be encouraged to think differently about, the environment. And I think a lot of that is happening, but it's going to change. It's going to be forcibly changed by new generations coming through.
Yeah. Awesome.
And listening to young people and hanging around with them and hearing what they're saying, and
giving them a voice,
putting them on the board.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Anna. That was an absolute pleasure to hear about your journey. Okay, so that is all for today, but if anyone has any burning questions, let me know. Also, I'm always looking for guests, so if you know anybody or you'd like to take part yourself, get in touch. You can reach me at gearedapp.co.uk. And you can also find any more information about us at Geared App there as well. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Anna, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.